In the summer of 1944, the quiet French city of Caen, once known for its medieval charm and peaceful streets, suddenly became the beating heart of one of the most intense struggles of World War I. After the D landings, the Allies pushed inland with a clear objective: secure Caen, the crossroads of Normandy. Whoever controlled this city controlled the movement of armies, supplies, and the future direction of the campaign in Western Europe. But what was expected to be a swift advance turned into a drawn-out contest of endurance, strategy, and sheer will. As British and Canadian troops fought to break through, they were met by determined German forces who transformed Caen and its surrounding countryside into a fortress of resistance. Every hedgerow hid danger. Every village became a battlefield. What unfolded was not a single clash, but a sequence of desperate engagements that shaped the entire course of the war in the West. In this story, we explore the harsh realities of the battle for Caen, its turning points, its heroes, and the decisions that defined its outcome. You will see how strategy collided with the brutality of real combat, how leadership shaped the fighting, and why this city became a symbol of sacrifice for thousands of soldiers. If you find history as powerful and meaningful as we do, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who love learning about the past. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. As the Allies pushed deeper into Normandy, the struggle for Caen revealed itself as far more complex than any commander had predicted. The initial hope of capturing the city in a swift, decisive thrust had already faded, replaced by the reality of a grinding, methodical fight. Into this escalating challenge stepped General Bernard Montgomery, whose plans sought to break the stalemate through a bold pincer movement. British forces were to advance along one flank, while Canadian troops pressed from another, squeezing German defenders into a position they could no longer hold. On paper, the strategy seemed sound, clear in intent, precise in coordination, and built on the momentum established after D-Day. But Normandy was not a battlefield that rewarded clean diagrams or confident arrows drawn across a map. What stood in the way was the ancient bocage, a landscape of tangled hedgerows, sunken lanes, and twisting fields that turned every approach into a potential trap. These hedgerows were not simple lines of shrubs. They were dense, centuries-old embankments that rose high and thick, capable of swallowing a tank column or concealing an entire squad of defenders. Each time British or Canadian soldiers attempted to move forward, they found themselves funneled into narrow paths where visibility was poor and ambush was almost guaranteed. Progress came in painful increments, measured in meters rather than kilometers, and every advance carried the cost of lives and shattered machines. Compounding the difficulty of the terrain was the presence of veteran German divisions who had transformed the region into a web of fortified positions. Among them were some of the most experienced and battle-hardened units of the war, equipped with well-placed anti-tank guns, mobile armor, and mortars that could respond quickly to any Allied movement. These forces understood how to turn the bocage to their advantage, slipping into new positions as soon as the Allies identified old ones, always forcing Montgomery's men into fresh fights where the enemy seemed to vanish and reappear with uncanny precision. Montgomery's pincer tightened, but each step forward demanded immense effort. British infantrymen advanced through the hedgerows with caution born of experience, knowing that silence could erupt into fire at any moment. Canadian armored units pushed down lanes so narrow that their tanks scraped both sides, unable to maneuver or retreat once engaged. Every mile pressed toward Caen required a relentless combination of bravery, coordination, and adaptation, and even then, success was never guaranteed. Reports from the front painted a picture of constant resistance, machine guns emerging from gaps in the earth, hidden anti-tank positions revealing themselves only through the sudden flash that destroyed a leading Churchill or Sherman, and counterattacks that surged without warning. The weight of these challenges slowed the momentum Montgomery needed. What began as a sweeping maneuver became a series of grueling engagements that forced the Allies to fight for each hedgerow, each farmhouse, each ridge. Caen remained just beyond reach, close enough to taste yet always shielded by layers of enemy preparation. Still, Montgomery pressed on, adjusting his plans to meet the realities unfolding before him. His divisions dug in, regrouped, and pushed forward again, determined to break through the defensive ring that shielded the city. The battle had transformed, not into the rapid capture once imagined, but into a relentless test of endurance and tactical flexibility, binding the struggle for Caen into the broader story of the Normandy campaign. The pressure to break the deadlock around Caen pushed the British High Command to seek bold maneuvers, and one of the most daring involved the legendary 7th Armored Division, the Desert Rats, whose speed and battlefield intuition had earned them a formidable reputation. After the grinding advance through the Norman countryside, they were tasked with striking deep into German-held territory, bypassing strongpoints and threatening Caen from the rear. The idea was clear. If they could swing around the German lines and cut key routes, the defenders would be forced to pull back, allowing the Allies to finally gain the momentum they desperately needed. As the tanks of the division began to move along the narrow roads and hedgerow-lined paths, there was a sense of tense anticipation among the crews. They had fought in North Africa, Italy, and now Normandy, but the terrain here felt unlike anything they had encountered. The bocage seemed to swallow sound and vision, making every bend a risk. Still, they pressed forward, hoping their speed would carry them beyond the danger before German commanders understood their intent. But the defenders were alert, and they were led by some of the most experienced armored units the German army could field. As the British column approached the village of Villers-Bocage, what seemed like an opportunity suddenly revealed itself as a carefully prepared trap. Hidden behind buildings and hedges were Tiger tanks commanded by Michael Whitman, a figure whose battlefield intuition made him one of the most feared tank leaders on the Western Front. The terrain allowed him to remain unseen until the moment he chose to strike. And when he did, the effect was immediate and devastating. Tanks at the front of the British column erupted into flames. Others were immobilized in the narrow streets, and the sudden shock rippled backward through the formation. The crews inside the vehicles scrambled to respond, but the confined streets of the village magnified the chaos, leaving them with little room to maneuver. Whitman's swift attack shattered the initial British momentum. The ambush did not end the operation, but it forced the 7th Armored Division into a defensive posture, buying the German defenders valuable time. Yet even as the smoke cleared from Villers-Bocage, the British command refused to abandon the wider effort. Reinforcements moved up, infantry pushed into secure buildings and crossroads, and artillery began to batter suspected German strongpoints. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and dust, evidence of how quickly fortunes on the battlefield could shift. Although the ambush had inflicted significant losses, the British retained their determination to push forward. In the days that followed, air support was called in, and bombing raids attempted to break German positions both in the village and along the approaches to Caen. These attacks forced the defenders to withdraw from some sectors, but they also hardened German resolve to hold the remaining ground at all costs. The clash at Villers-Bocage became one of the defining moments of the struggle for Caen, not because it halted the Allied effort entirely, but because it exposed how deeply challenging the Normandy landscape could be, and how capable the defenders still were. Even after the shock of D-Day, it highlighted the constant tension between planning and reality, between bold vision and the unpredictable nature of combat. For the men of the 7th Armored Division, the encounter was a stark reminder that every advance carried risks hidden behind the next hedgerow, and that even the most experienced units could find themselves suddenly fighting for survival. The larger campaign pressed on, but Villers-Bocage remained a symbol of the fierce resistance surrounding Caen, a moment when the path to the city narrowed to a single village. and the outcome hung on seconds of decision amid the shadows of its streets. As the Allies pressed on from the beaches, the window for a swift German counterattack closed almost before it had fully opened, a reality shaped by decisions far from the front lines. Adolf Hitler's infamous micromanagement delayed the deployment of the panzer divisions, keeping armored reserves locked in place while the Allies consolidated their positions along the Normandy coast. Every hour of hesitation cost the defenders an opportunity to strike decisively, and by the time orders were loosened, the tide of battle had already begun to shift in favor of the invading forces. Yet the German response was far from neutralized. The terrain, the hedgerows, and the sheer determination of elite units ensured that any advance would be contested with a ferocity that would define the campaign for weeks to come. In the wake of the British and Canadian pushes toward Caen, the arrival of Waffen's units signaled a new phase of intensity, a stark reminder that even a delayed force could impose staggering resistance when expertly commanded. These formations, battle-hardened and fiercely loyal, moved quickly into key defensive positions, fortifying villages, crossroads, and the natural choke points created by the bocage, the patchwork of fields and hedgerows that broke up the landscape into an intricate labyrinth. For the Allied commanders, the sudden appearance of these units transformed what had seemed like a tactical maneuver into a grinding contest of attrition, where every foot of ground would be paid for in blood and courage. The presence of the SS not only complicated the physical terrain, but also imposed a psychological weight on the men facing them. They were well aware of the ruthlessness and skill of their opponents, and each engagement carried the palpable tension of knowing that hesitation could be fatal. As the fighting intensified, the Allies were forced to coordinate infantry, armor, and artillery with greater precision, relying on combined arms tactics to overcome entrenched positions that seemed almost impervious to frontal assault. Bombing raids and creeping artillery barrages became critical tools, designed to soften defenses enough to allow the infantry and tanks to advance without being destroyed in the open. The struggle for every village, every crossroads, became a story of determination versus opportunity, where hours of delay by high command could ripple across the battlefield, altering the course of operations and forcing commanders on both sides to adapt in real time. Despite the initial advantage of overwhelming numbers and air superiority, the Allies encountered the sobering reality that strategic hesitation, terrain mastery, and elite enemy forces could converge to produce battles far more costly and prolonged than anticipated. The liberation of Caen was no longer a simple matter of movement along predetermined routes. It was a test of endurance, ingenuity, and leadership under conditions that punished even the smallest miscalculation. In the shadow of these events, the Normandy campaign evolved into a war of attrition where victories were measured not just by ground gained, but by the ability to sustain the offensive against an enemy capable of swift, deadly counterstrikes. And every moment of hesitation, every armored misstep, and every unexpected ambush reminded the Allied forces that the road to Caen would be fought inch by inch, under the ever-present threat of fierce and highly capable German defenders. As the campaign for Caen stretched into weeks of relentless fighting, the Allies turned to a bold new plan. Operation Epsom, designed to outflank the city and finally break the stalemate that had gripped the Normandy front. British and Canadian forces advanced methodically, navigating the treacherous bocage countryside where every hedge, sunken lane, and hidden ditch became a potential trap, while German defenders, bolstered by elite units and heavy artillery, prepared to meet them with ferocious resistance. The thunder of shells and the chilling rattle of the EG-42 machine gun echoed across the hills, creating an atmosphere of constant tension, where every move could spell survival or catastrophe. Amidst this chaos, Hill 112 emerged as a focal point of the struggle, a ridge that offered a commanding view of the surrounding terrain. and therefore a vital prize for both sides. Capturing it would allow the Allies to threaten German positions in Caen. Yet the defenders, understanding its strategic value, poured men and firepower into holding it at all costs. For days, soldiers fought with determination and exhaustion intertwined, launching assaults, repelling counterattacks, and clinging to every yard of ground gained, while the landscape itself bore witness to the intensity of the combat with shattered trees, cratered fields, and the haunting remnants of armored vehicles strewn across the slopes. The struggle for Hill 112 became emblematic of the broader Normandy campaign, a brutal, grinding contest where strategy, courage, and sheer endurance collided. While casualties mounted on both sides, the Allies slowly adapted to the fierce German defenses, learning from each encounter, coordinating infantry, armor, and artillery more effectively, and beginning to turn the tide of this crucial section of the front. Operation Epsom, though costly, demonstrated the relentless resolve of the Allied forces and the importance of combined arms tactics in overcoming even the most formidable opposition. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, the campaign for Caen underscored the high stakes of the Normandy invasion and the extraordinary courage of those who fought to secure a foothold that would eventually pave the way for the liberation of France and the defeat of Nazi Germany. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of World War I's most intense battles. If you found this story compelling, please give the video a like, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of history's defining moments.